What is the most intriguing thing about the difference between men and women and their self-esteem?
Wow, that's a big one to start off with.
Why not?
Well, I know that from my opinion, looking at it, and Beth can talk about this from what she sees, but one of the most interesting and humorous findings in the literature is that from a very young age, boys tend to overestimate their physical ability. And it seems to track all the way through the lifespan. And that even when people are in their 70s and 80s, if you ask guys what they can do, they always seem to be able to overestimate what they're actually capable of. And the reverse applies, that females seem to be the reverse. They seem to feel that they're not as capable as they actually are. I mean, I know that in my work with athletes, it's amazing. I spend more time telling my male athletes, you're really not as good as you think you are, in a humorous way. I mean, but with the females, it's really about, you're really great. I mean, I had one athlete who, she was number 7 in the world in an event which was quantitative. So it's a swimming event, there's an actual time, she's ranked number 7 in the world, but she had just incredible confidence issues. And I remember sitting down with her and showing her the rankings, the world rankings. And we were going into an Olympic year, and she looked and she goes, yeah, but that's not really where I am.
Whoa.
And we started having conversations about, yeah, but that girl number 8, she took the year off, and number 9, she's coming back from injury, and before we know it, she'd talked her way down to about 16th. And I was just absolutely stunned. So the reality is that's actually not uncommon and fairly general. So we have a tendency for guys to overestimate their physical ability. One of the key parts of body image and key parts of physical self-esteem is that physical ability element. So guys tend to have, in general, a higher sense of their body physique than females. And there's lots of different reasons for that, but that is definitely a pretty robust finding in the literature.
Yeah, I would say I see the same thing even on just a day-to-day armchair, quarterback sort of way, because guys will come into a class, like the class I teach here, the sculpt class at noon, which is a really popular class. And what happens here is the gals go back to their little work environments and they're like, oh God, that was a great class. It was so hard. We did, 1,000,000 tricep push-ups. And the guys around are like, yeah. And so the girls will egg the guys on to come to class. And the guys just, they come in, they're totally overconfident. They pick up heavy weights. They're just ready to rock and roll. And they're dying. They're stopping, they're taking water breaks. They're just like, and after class, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. But it's not, but they have a good time with it. Like it doesn't freak them out that everyone else was going on and they weren't. They're just like, oh yeah, I'll be back, that's great. Or meanwhile, the gals, they'll come up to me before class and they'll give me the whole thing about, I'm not sure, I think maybe it's gonna be a little too hard for me, but I'm gonna give it a try. And so they soften the edges right from the beginning. And I think at the end of the day, and we've talked about this a lot, one of the reasons I love teaching is I love just lighting that fire of somebody going, holy heck, I never thought I could do that, right? And that's cool, that's a cool thing, and I think it has lasting value.
That's very cool. But here's a silly question probably. With the difference between men and women, does that really affect the way a woman is going to approach everything from an exercise class to a lifestyle change? We soften the edges. We have a tendency to do that, to go, oh, I'm not so sure I'm going to be able to do this. Does that have a long-term impact for women, do you think?
I would imagine that there's a generational effect here as well. I mean, post-1972 with Title IX,
right.
I mean, the girls that I work with and the girls that I see who are playing competitive sports, who eventually are going to transition into more lifetime fitness activities, they're as much like the guys as the guys are. I mean, there really has been a leveling of the playing field because they're now much more familiar, the expectations are the same. So I think you're finding that younger women, who were benefited from Title IX and have benefited
right.
from an attempt to at least even the playing field somewhat, at least at the high school level and a little bit of college, is to truly open their eyes to what they're capable of. And I think that probably has led to some changes. So I think if you look across the lifespan, the older generation, the older women who didn't have the opportunity to benefit from some of the experiences that are now there for young girls, I think there's probably a significant difference in the way they approach lots of things related to the physical, to the corporal reality that they live in.
And I would guess even there, the way they would describe themselves, because women of my generation, like we grew up, we might play a little sport on the side or in PE, but we definitely didn't describe ourselves as an athlete, even though meanwhile I was doing 2 or 3 hours of classical ballet a day or something, but I would never have thought to describe myself as an athlete. I think younger women, even if sport isn't their number one thing, they would still tend to describe themselves as athletic. So I think there's kind of a difference.
There's some interesting stuff that's out there which says that back in the day, when you looked at who was the most popular kid in school, at high schools, on the boys' side it used to always be the jock. What's happened on the boys' side now is the jock plus academics, and on the girls' side it was always social.
Right.
But now the research suggests that it's jock plus academics. So jock plus academics on both sides. So if you're athletic and you're also good academically, that tends to define you as somebody who is well liked and is high on the social hierarchy within the school. So I mean, that's a qualitative change.
It's interesting, right?
In a very short period of time, in a relatively short period of time. So I mean, it speaks to, in many ways, the power of the environment, and it speaks to the power of what you can do structurally, which not only in terms of changing attitudes and beliefs about what should be important when you're during adolescence, but also it can also speak to what should be important as you move through your life from a lifestyle perspective. And I think we've seen that as well. I mean, what is an attractive female body now? I mean, I think that there's been some significant qualitative shifts in what is acceptable and what is attractive. I mean, the people who seem to be promoted now as models from a body perspective, it isn't just these rake thin fashion runway models. There are much more, the athletic female is being seen as that is desirable, and that's got to be good. I mean, it's got to be to the positive and will help sort of allow all girls and all women to be able to find their niche in that body image area.
Right, because it's really hard when you're growing up with a lot of media, and I think even for women my age, and I'm 50, we grew up and we had a few little magazines we might looked at. One was put out by the Girl Scouts of America, so it was all clean image and all that. But then you come up and there's like, girls today are bombarded with so much media that if we didn't have those kind of images, I think to counterbalance, it could be pretty crazy. I mean,
I still think there's a huge way to go. I mean, I still think that the norm, the aspirational norm for young girls just isn't achievable. I mean, physiologically, genetically, you just can't do it. So, I mean, I still think that there is an unbalance out there, and there still is an unfairness about the whole thing, which sort of speaks to the psychology of a lot of why people drop out and why people start, and so it all sort of fits in. And on the guy side, there's a less of an emphasis on the body. I mean, it's much more the attributes of a successful male are not tied as much to a body as I think it is on the female. So even if you have a female who's incredibly successful in whatever field of endeavor she's chosen, there's still an element, what does she look like? Mm-hmm. Whereas, on the male side, that doesn't seem to be a factor at all. I mean, it's much more about what can you actually do as opposed to what you look like. And I still think that there's huge imbalances and discrepancies into expectations of what it is to be female, what it is to be male. And that's all tied up into a lot of the issues that Beth deals with on a day-to-day. I mean, even the female athletes I work with who, if you looked at them, you go, wow, I mean, look at, right. She's just incredibly lean and she's incredibly athletic. Disordered eating patterns at best, eating disorders at worst, are still extremely common, right, in the type of sports that I work with on the female side.